In this example, we're going to look at the relationship between anthropometric, or body length measurements, and their relation with each other in a male population. And we're going to use MATLAB tools and regression to see these relationships. For the data set, we're going to use the ANSWER data set, which was a study done in the 1980s of military men and women in the United States that measured a lot of different body segments of them on almost 2,000 people. So the first thing we need to do is we're going to have to pull that data into MATLAB. Now, in the folder, there's an Excel sheet this time called Answer Men. We're only looking at the male data, and we want to see what it looks like. This is a simplified version of it. I only have here 5 measurements from, if we scroll down here, almost 1,800 people. It has these 5 different measurements. It has their stature or their height. It has the length of their forearm plus their hand. It has the length of each one's foot, their ear length, and the circumference of the. And for these measurements, all the units are measured in millimeters. So what we want to see here is that since we're using Excel, we can use columns and rows in order to import our data. We see column A is stature, B, C, D, E are going to be used. So we can import this using the XLS read command. So what we have to do is tell it the name of the Excel file. So this is answer men XLSX. And then we can tell it which cells to bring in, or what range of cells to bring in. So I want to make stature. I want to save all of the stature data. So if I go back to my Excel sheet, it starts at A2. I don't want to bring in this header A1, but A2 is the first cell I want to bring in to A1775. Right, so for this command, it's going to look in the file answermen XLSX and import just the cells A2 to A1775. So it's only going to bring in these numbers that I have highlighted here under stature. Again, I don't want A1 because that's just a header, and the MATLAB is not going to be able to bring that in correctly. So if I run this, it's just bringing in all of those stature measurements, again, measured in millimeters, and we see that we have 1,774 values. And I'll suppress this because I don't want to, I just want to save in the variable. I don't want to actually see it. Right, if we look at the second, we have our forearm hand length. I'll just call this forearm in MATLAB. Copy this over. So this is going to be the B column from 2 to 1775. Then we have our foot length, which is column C. Then we have our ear in column D. And finally we have the head circumference in column E. So again, I can import this one column at a time into these separate variables. So again, my height, the forearm length plus my hand length, the foot length, how long their ear is, and the circumference of each person's head. All right, so what we're trying to answer in this question is how predictive is stature, or the person's height, of these other 4 measurements. So the first thing I want is just a visualization of the relationship between the height and each of these 4 measurements. So I'm going to look at them all independently for this example. So I'm going to make subplots for each of these relationships. All right, and we see that we have our horizontal axis is stature, our vertical is our forearm length, and I'll put that label here. Again, this is measured, everything is in millimeters here. And I'll put on our grid so we can see what that looks like. All right, let me just run the subplot again. All right, so we have our stature versus our forearm length. I'm going to put them all in before I start making any sort of assessments here. I can make the next part of my subplot, so I want to look at length, height versus foot length. And then in the third, Well, let me plot these two. So we see we have the top two now from subplot 221, 222. Now 223, I'm going to have my ear length. And in the last one, I'm going to put my head circumference. And I'll plot this. So we have all four of these relationships. Again, in this example, I'm just looking at how well does stature predict each of these four quantities independently. So just visually here, let's see what we have going on. If we look at the upper left, our stature to forearm length, we see it looks like there's a general trend here that the larger your stature or the taller you are, then the longer your forearm plus hand length is going to be. So there's a fairly nice linear relationship between the two. And we'll see what they look like on top of each other there. If we look at foot length, we see a similar type of relationship here. Generally, the taller you are, the longer your foot is the general rule we see in the top right. In the bottom left, we don't see quite as nice a relationship here between stature and ear length. It's not really a clear trend like we saw in the top two here. And if we look at the bottom right, it's the same type of idea. We just have kind of this blob that doesn't have really any sort of direction like we saw with foot length. We kind of see generally that the taller you are, the larger your head circumference is going to be, but it doesn't seem quite as strong as we see in the top two, where they form kind of this cluster around a line with a positive slope. And we're going to see that the numbers are going to agree with this kind of visual inspection that we can make. So let's look at what the numbers say about these relationships, and we can use a fit. Now, I'm going to try to do just a linear relationship between stature and each of these four quantities here. Right, so my fit type that I'm going to use poly 1, which we saw as before is just going to be an intercept and a slope. I'm going to use that for all of these relationships. Right, so I'm going to find a function f1 and a goodness of fit 1. And this will be for the relationship between my stature and forearm to start. And my fit type, I'm going to use ft, which is this linear relationship. And I have to define it first. I'll come back to these results in a minute. I just want to run through all four of them in succession though. So the second one, so that I have a separate function and a second goodness of fit, I'm going to look at the foot. And then for the third one, I'm going to look at ear. And the fourth one, I'm going to look at head circumference. And this will be goodness of fit 4 and fit number 4 here. Alright, so if I look at my workspace, I now have those 4 fit functions, and I have 4 goodnesses of fit to look at. So let's see what the relationship is, or numerically, how well is stature a predictor of each of these relationships, or each of these quantities. Alright, so goodness of fit 1 was a measurement for stature versus forearm. So I'm going to look at GOF1. And I can see here, I'm only going to look at the r-squared value for this example. I see an r-squared value of 56%. And I'll bring back up my figure here. So this is for the top left here, goodness of fit 56%, which actually for this amount of data and for kind of body length data, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good linear relationship between the two, even though relative to some of the previous examples we looked at where we had r-squares of 98%, for this kind of real data, 56% is relatively good, and we'll see that in comparison as we go to ear length and head circumference. Okay. If we look at goodness of fit 2, which was between stature and foot, we see here 49%, 50% about. Also a pretty good r-square value, meaning that there is a fairly linear relationship between someone's stature and foot length, at least according to this data. Now let's, in contrast, look at goodness of fit 3, looking between stature and ear length. Here we have an r-squared value of only 6%, or 0.06. So not really any, it's a very, very, very weak relationship using stature as a predictor of someone's ear length. And we're going to see a similar result in 4 when we look at stature versus head circumference. We have about a 12% or 0.117 r-squared value. So there is kind of a very weak relationship between how tall someone is and their head circumference. So based, again, visually, we see that 1 and 2 look like pretty strong relationships between your height and forearm length, height and foot length, which we should expect just from observing people. But for ear length and head circumference, we saw that visually we don't have that nice clustering around a line, and the r-squared values also give us that same type of information, that the r-squared values are low, indicating that the linear relationship between them is not very strong. But what I can do now is, now that I have these fits, I can add that to my plots. So for each of these subplots, I can now add my fit line. So first, let me make up some statures here. So I'll make this linear space of statures between my minimum stature that I have for any person and the maximum. And I'll use 1,000 points for this. All right, so this represents just 1,000 statures between the minimum person I measured and the maximum person I measured. I don't want to try to extrapolate from my data, just interpolate from my data. So I can plot those made up these numeric statures versus my first function evaluated at all of those points. And as we've done before, I'm going to indicate this regression line as a red dashed line. And I want to do the same thing for the rest of these plots. So for foot, that was function f2. Let's see what these functions look like. So again, f1, we see it's using poly 1, it's this slope, which they call p1, times x plus p2. So in order, according to the model that we made, in order to estimate someone's, this is for forearm length, we're going to take 0.2616 times their height in millimeters plus 24.68, and that will give us our estimate as to the length of their forearm plus hand. And then if we look at the other ones, f2, we're going to take 0.1373 times their height in millimeters plus 28.63, and that's our estimate as to their foot length, also in millimeters. So I'll plot these regression lines on each of the appropriate plots here, and just replot all of these. I forgot to do a hold on. So I overwrote it before. Let me try this again. So that's what we're looking at. All right, so again, visually, we're seeing that that line, pretty much the data adheres fairly close to the line. Same thing in the second, in the foot. For ear and head, not so much. Okay, so let's see how else we can use this data. The first thing we've concluded is that based on the r-squared values, based on the visualization, stature is a pretty good estimator to forearm length and to your foot length. It's not very good at estimating what your ear length is or what your head circumference is. And we made these models not only using the r-squared to evaluate how good of a predictor it is, but now we have the regressions so that we can estimate for someone, if we know just their stature, we can make an estimate as to what the at least here, their foot length or forearm length is going to be. So for myself, just to try this out, if I take this model and I put in my height, which is about 1,854 millimeters, if I use F2 here, this is going to give me an estimate as to what my foot length should be based on all of this other collected data. All right, so if I run this, it's estimating that for me, based on the regression model, that my foot length is about 283 millimeters. So again, this is not necessarily saying that all people that have a height of 1854 millimeters have a foot length of 283, but it's a pretty fair approximation or estimate as to what you should find based on the data that was previously collected.